From its origin as a utility for the U.S. Department of Defense to the advent of social networks, online communities, and e-commerce, the internet is a melting pot of ideas, information, and creativity. Each week, join our hosts Michael and Josh as they explore this weird wide web and learn how this relatively new phenomenon is changing our culture. This is Generation Web.
This episode of Generation Web is sponsored by Anchor. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started creating your own podcast, and we'll hear more about them later. My name is Michael, and we're joined here by my friend Josh, and what him and I are going to try to do is take you guys on a little adventure down some rabbit holes that we find real interesting on the internet. The whole idea of this podcast is to kind of find what the internet's doing, how it's shaping our future and our culture, and see if we can really get into some fun topics and discussions. And again, like I said, bring you guys along for the ride. I went ahead and Josh prepared a couple fun things for us to talk about right off the start that I could find on the internet. And just kind of going for just doing some Google searches, like what is weird on the internet, or what's funny, or what are some of the strangest things I can think of. Jerseys that feel what the players feel. This is something that I found literally just yesterday morning. It's a shirt you can buy that you connect wirelessly, and when you're watching a soccer game, if someone gets hit by a ball or gets kicked, you will feel that sensation as they're feeling it in the sports game.
What is that going to run you?
No price on this yet, and this is again another rabbit hole is all these different GoFundMe, the whole
right.
Anyone being able to try to put up a product and think they have an idea and try to get it for sale is something that you couldn't do 30, 40 years ago. The trash can that posts to Facebook, another product that every time you throw something away, little lid opens up, snaps a picture, post it to a Facebook account.
Why would anyone want such a thing?
It depends on what you're throwing away, but this was apparently Newcastle University researchers conducted an experiment to see how embedding a camera in personal trash cans would affect recycling habits. So it would post this to your Facebook account.
All right. I was, my mind's already going down the rabbit hole with, all right, now someone's going to monitor the data for what you're throwing away. Now they know what you could potentially need, and then feed you advertisements based on that data that would then, have an impact on what you would purchase. I would not have one of those in my home. I don't even like having an Alexa.
So not even the Amazon egg tray, which is a connected egg tray that monitors how many eggs you have in the refrigerator and displays information on a mobile app and can recommend purchasing, directly from Amazon.
Oh my goodness. Well, that is the world that we are going to soon be living in, Michael. And that actually kind of ties into what the topic that I'm going to bring up today. So get ready, pull out your tin hat.
I've got the tinfoil prepared, and this is kind of, I guess, what this theme of this episode is going to be about. Well, we're all sitting at home with the crisis that's going on. I know YouTube's demonetizing the word coronavirus, or COVID-19 specifically. Mm-hmm. So we'll kind of refer to it as the event. I know your topic directly ties into what's going on when this is recording, and we're recording this just to date this, I think, like the first week of April, not to give a specific date. But that's kind of where we are in the United States right now, is just beginning this lockdown. And everybody and everything is using these digital services. Like, we're recording this podcast via Zoom because we can't be face-to-face right now. Everything's changing. We're working remotely, and all of these connected services are getting stressed. And I can't wait. We're going to refer to you now as the conspiracy master going forward.
Yes. Speaking of which, I wish I had a little bit more knowledge about this whole lockdown a couple weeks ago. I would have bought some stock in Zoom. And I mean, our economy's tanking, but Zoom's doing pretty well right now.
There's a couple hedge fund managers that they've posted gains of like 40% that I was reading in this crisis that it's going on, specifically because they made some key investments early in January and February for their different clients. and that's almost insider trading, but not.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't. I think it's just being intelligent. But if you had previous knowledge that this was all going to happen, then you could look at it that way. I mean, just like those congressmen that sold off all their stocks. I mean, that's insane. Those guys should get thrown in jail, if you ask me. Which I don't even know if you know about, but it's neither here nor now.
Rich white person jail.
Yeah, exactly.
Where they
Martha
sent Martha
Stewart.
Stewart. Yeah.
Yeah.
She ironically has more jail time than Snoop Dogg. Quick little fun fact.
Well, they're good friends.
They are. They are. I've seen the commercials.
That's weird, man.
And this is kind of the last thing I wanted to bring up before we dive into what today's episode is going to be, is kind of a head-to-head. If I kind of challenge Josh is spend a couple minutes on the internet and let's see if we can find ourselves some good stories that really kind of sum up what the internet can be about, or what could only maybe be possible by the internet. And the last thing here is there's services out there where you can have people stand in line. And I do want to do a separate episode specifically on some of these new services like Lyft, Ride, Uber, DoorDash, and how people are taking advantage of them and do stuff like that in the future.
Cool. I'm about it, man. I am about it.
All right. Without further ado, we've got two topics for you guys prepared today. I'm going to explain what I've called the Great Internet Heist. And Josh, you want to tell everybody what your topic is?
Yeah, so I like to give it a nice little fun play on words. So the name of my topic is COVID-5G. So coronavirus, potentially 5G tied into that. We'll dive.
I know 5G, but all right, sit back, relax, guys, and when we'll be right back here, we'll dive into the Great Internet Heist. It might have been a scene out of a movie from the Great Depression. Hundreds of frantic people tearing their hair out as they mobbed the doors to a bank, only to realize the bank's owners, along with their money, had vanished into thin air. This scene, however, took place not in some seemingly distant historical period, but much closer to home. The location, hold your laughter, was EVE Online. EVE Online is a science fiction-based MMORPG, and I'm not going to bore you with going into any further definition of this game. You have Google, use it. There's a player-run bank called the Intergalactic Bank. It's a privately run in-game institution that for several months convinced players of this game to deposit their money, their in-game currency, into accounts, and the promise, just like any bank would, of accruing interest on a monthly basis. And he ran this bank for several months, convinced tons of players to deposit all this money, and actually did pay out a lot of this money back to the players, just confirming the legitimacy of this whole thing. This whole idea came to the halt when this bank, the owner of this bank, known to the game as his handle was Cali, ran off with about 790 billion ISK, or their intergalactic currency in the game. This bank was supposed to function much like a real-world bank, turning its assets into investment capital and then using the returns to pay investments back to the bank clients. Instead, it functioned like a 1980s era savings and loan with no insurance to protect the clients. In short, Cali got away scot-free, and at last report, he was still roaming EVE Online, armed and extremely wealthy. Now, that's the basic kind of script I could prepare out of researching this article, but it goes so deep that this is back in 2006. And why I picked this article specifically is I was one of the people that had money invested in this EVE Intergalactic Bank. I was in high school at the time. The worth of this in today's money, and it's hard to explain how 100 or 790 billion of this fake money in a game could be worth any real world money, but There are websites out there and services where you can exchange this currency for real world money, and that's about $170,000 in in-game currency that he strolled out with, and he hasn't cashed it out. That's the weird thing, is he is known to log in from time to time, and people are actively hunting him down in this giant game. And there's even been death threats to him, and there's even been lawsuits filed with the FTC. And there's really just been no other recent things in the last 3 or 4 years that have popped up from him that I could find, but this was something that I thought was extremely interesting and that you wouldn't see happen without the internet. Online communities, gaming, people actually recreating an economy, and banks and corporations within a game itself, instead of doing that in the real world. I just find fascinating how people can get lost in this, and then there are links to suicides because people lost fortunes, and this is considered, as far as what the internet is concerned, is the greatest internet heist, even though it's only about $170,000 in real money.
I have a question for you, Michael.
Yeah.
And I'm actually a little bit familiar with this. I was lost on YouTube at some point and came across some video that talked about gaming and e-commerce, and this was brought up, but it was more of like a countdown video. And in fact, I think this topic ended up being like number one. Regardless, were there any legal repercussions?
I had a little extra info bullet point here that said, unfortunately, as spectacularly as disappointing as Callie's crime may be to some of those living in the EVE Online universe, it's unlikely that the FTC will be signing or logging anything with against anybody anytime soon. He did technically break the EULA, the online agreement between the game and the user.
Mhm.
But to my knowledge, he's unless there's been something that's more recent, that he has not been found. Now, this guy in particular. Now, when I went to go look this up again for the purpose of this podcast, since me being a part of this, and I only lost like 800 ISK, like it was stupid compared to the amounts.
Minimal.
That there's someone who is now, there's like this big mafia within the game. There was some sort of heist that was like trillions of this in-game currency that's even bigger than this one. But as far as I'm aware, Callie was not caught, quote unquote.
Do they know who he is outside of his EVE Online identity? I would assume they have to.
The developers of the game, yes, do know that, but the whole purpose of EVE Online is to create a living economy, and that's kind of the dark side of this game. Is there's no, the developers want this to be as a close to simulation as real life as possible, so they want the economy to police, or the players to police it themselves. There are corporations in the game that do act as the law enforcement. There are judges, there are trials, it is a complete lack of better culture in a game that will govern itself. And that's kind of what they want. So they've been very hands off.
Gotcha. I love this topic for two reasons. The first reason is I think it's really relevant, especially to what's going on right now with the lockdown. You know, a lot of people are staying at home playing games like Warzone, Fortnite, and you know, the free-to-play microtransaction model is what a lot of game developers are going to. So I think number one, it's definitely relevant. Number two, it just does bring back a bunch of memories of different games I played where the same exact thing went on. And I know that you're a gamer as well, so we probably have some crazy stories that relate to this. I find it interesting that you are also kind of a victim in this, even though it was a minuscule amount. Of course, I've never played EVE Online. I'm a little bit familiar with it, just on some things that I've seen, like on YouTube and stuff like that. But
EVE Online, spreadsheets, the game. It was very much like you created a new account in this game, and the Eve Intergalactic Bank, the EIB, was a player-made corporation, and it was like when you playing other games where you have banks and economies, the first thing I went to go look for was you had to turn in a contract, and I've heard there were banks and you can make money and you start it, put it in there and you'll make some investment or make a small percentage of return. And this was the bank to invest in. Like this is where, and you literally through the game message the guy, sent the money. You got a weekly message that this was your account and this is how much you have in the account and this is how much interest you've earned to date or whatever.
So
really
outside
cool.
of that, what type of game is EVE Online? Is it like an RPG? Are there other things to do?
Yes and yes. So there's no defined like you have to do this, then you have to do this. There are no levels to complete. There are no objectives really. You pick a role. You get a spaceship. You start in a very small kind of satellite colony out in space, and you pick a entry job that maybe you want to go out and mine, or maybe you want to go exploring, and based on that profession you'll get some tasks, and it's then the grind of making this currency called ISK.
So it's like a space-oriented Second Life, based on your explanation, where the goal of the game is really no different than what most people's goals are in real life, which is to be successful, which a lot of people equate to, becoming wealthy.
And a much more fun version of this game is GTA 5 role-playing.
Okay. Gotcha.
If you want to bring it down to earth, this is just that in space.
Okay.
So you kind of pick your role, and it's very much a role-play type environment. You have different factions, at the top level of this game, you're part of a faction. You have giant player-created space fleets of all sorts of different types of spaceships and these massive space battles that take weeks in game to complete. And that's maybe a whole nother topic of some of these quote unquote wars that have taken place in game are quite interesting.
So next question that I have for you is, how much real world money did you dump into this game, if any?
It's about $100.
Okay, so that $100 equated to, I feel like you would get more than 800 ISK. It sounds like
it was
other things.
It was probably like if I can remember, it was a certain X amount of ISK, maybe 2,000 or something like that, plus a like extra inventory slot for your ship, and then it was like an extra like paint or skin,
spray
if
or
you will.
something, yeah.
It wasn't. I think that was the entry pack, and then I did so everything you do in the game, if you want to go mine a rock, you fly your ship out to the run. This is where the game lost me. You fly your ship out to a rock, and you're going to mine the rock, and it's going to take 6 hours.
Oh my goodness.
So
I could never.
You could log out, and that's what you do. You log out, and your little ship's sitting there mining, and you log back in, or it's like a mobile transaction on your damn smartphone games, as you've got Mine Fast Now unlock, complete the task now for X amount, that kind of thing.
Gotcha.
And I think that's drastically changed in how the game is now, and how they've structured those microtransactions. They've somehow have got to have made the game easier to get into for new players, because if this has been out since 2006, how can you ever catch up if you're getting in it today?
Right. That's what actually that leads to the next question that I had, which is, do you know what the player base is like?
That's a good question. I don't. It's probably under 100,000. It's not like we're not sitting in front of two computers.
Yeah, I'm
So
looking.
currently online, we're looking at 37,000. The max in the last 24 hours, 39,000. The current record is 65,000. That's year to date. So yeah, they're averaging, looks like on a daily basis, anywhere from 30 to 40,000 players.
Okay, so it's not, it's not on the scale of like a Fortnite or Warzone or Apex, some of the other big games that are out there. But the game came out in 2006. When did this Cali guy run with all of the money? So what year did that
This,
take place?
I think this happened in early 06, if I remember
Okay.
this, because I graduated in 06, and this happened before graduation. So this had to have been, right topical this time period, April, May, something along that line. The article I was referring to back, and this is dated like August or September of that year, to help. And it looks like the, all-time player count of EVE was in like their heyday was 06 through 09 was kind of the 2010. The game was released in end of 2003.
Okay. I find it the most interesting part of the story is that uh, not that he scammed people. I mean, that's basically what he did, but that he's just holding on to that currency and he hasn't done anything with it. I find that weird. I feel like, if I were in his shoes, I would just say, hey, I'm done with this game. Let me take all of this currency that I have and sell it off for
Well, that's maybe where he's
more
being
money.
smart, because that's then where legal repercussions come in. If to this point he's not violated terms of service or anything, he is playing the game.
Okay.
A very bad way to play the game, but he's playing the game. The moment he goes and tries to sell that currency on a player auctions or other unnamed website to sell this kind of stuff, no offense, player auctions, love you, bought some accounts, sold some currency. He is technically violating the terms of service, and EVE Online could then take him to small claims court or sue him or whatever they want to do. But
Yeah.
if they wanted to.
Yeah, and I know it's kind of there are some laws. I'm definitely not well versed in them, but I know for a fact, like on eBay, you cannot sell digital goods or digital currency. It's against their terms of service, and I think the reason why is because eBay doesn't have the ability to protect you as a buyer. They can't ever verify if you've received the goods, and I've actually been scammed selling online or digital goods or digital currency, whatever you want to call it, before in the past, and that was for a much smaller amount of money, and I was so angry. So I couldn't imagine being an EVE online player dumping a bunch of money into the bank thinking that in the end I'm going to get some sort of return, and then all of a sudden it disappears, especially if I really love the game. What I find weird is that had to impact the player base, and the fact that the developers didn't do anything about it. I think in the long term that had to impact them monetarily. Like if I was someone who was really vested in this game, I dumped a bunch of my money into a bank, and then all of a sudden it turns out that it's a giant scam and I kind of lose everything. There's no reason for me, other than potentially having some sort of personal vendetta in hopes that I'm going to recoup that money back. There's no reason for me to kind of start from square one. I would just move on to something else. I mean, what
This
are your
was
thoughts on that?
apparently 40% of the total in-game currency.
ISK?
Yeah, this was he ran off with 40% of the total amount of money in game at the time. Bankrupted players that have been playing for, if this was early 06 and this came out in late 03, people that have put 2 years into the game. This guy runs a successful bank for 2 months, and you've got $1 million ISK already. So you say, well, screw it, I'll give him half,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
then he runs off with it a month later. That's a year's worth of work or 2 years worth of work down the drain. I'm sure the player base, and I'm looking at a graph here, after there doesn't look like to be a huge spike in players not playing this. Actually, I think drum up a lot of attention to the game,
Okay.
and brought a lot of players to it. The publicity and kind of the whole. That's what Sea of Thieves banks on now, is the whole. That's part of the game. You're a pirate,
Mm-hmm.
troll. So
Yeah, it's weird. While we're on this topic, just from your perspective, like, because obviously, as I mentioned, we're both still gamers. What's the most amount of money you think you've spent on a video game? And not the game itself, or just on items or in-game currency, whatever it may be.
it's a little game called Overwatch. Skins are pretty.
I had a feeling you were going to say something that related to
it's not only did I have a problem with the skins for that game just because they made them look so damn good. I bought the game for PC. I bought the game for PS4. I bought the game for Xbox. I own it on every console it's out on. I've played it on every console. I played it competitively on every platform I can. Wanted to try to find out which player base had the worst amount of players that I could do the best in.
Mm-hmm.
Turns out that his PS4 has the absolute worst player base of Overwatch. I was able to get a diamond rank there. Besides the point, it's somewhere. It's around 1,000.
Wow.
Maybe under. Over, and that's over the period of the game. Like, it wasn't all at once.
Right, of course. Yeah, I mean, I was just, in fact, it was funny. I was just on Twitter the other day. Kendrick Perkins, who's a former NBA player, he's now an analyst on ESPN. He tweeted out just a couple days ago that his son spent, I believe it was $10,000 on Fortnite skins and V-Bucks and stuff like that. And he's obviously a millionaire because he was a former professional NBA player, but even that was like alarming to him, and he had no idea. Nowadays, if you have a PlayStation or an Xbox, you have your credit card or debit card linked to it, and hey, all right, I'll have my son occupy himself playing some Fortnite. Next thing you know, you get hit with a bill for $10,000. It's pretty crazy, and it's not to veer too much off topic, but it's something that I think our legal system's going to have to start addressing, because it is somewhat a form of like online gambling, and it can be addictive. So it's
World Health Organization, as of this last week, has doubled back on their statement that says gaming's not addictive. Be apart together or whatever, play games. It's not addicting anymore.
I disagree with that 1,000%. I know I would beat my kid if he spent. I don't have a child. I shouldn't really be saying that I'd beat a child, but I would be very upset. I'd be very angry if I had a child that unknowingly, to me, spent a bunch of money on basically nothing of real world value. That's the crazy thing about it too. It's not like you're seeing anything out of it. It's a skin in a video game.
So whose job is it? Is it the parent's job to parent the kid, or is it the developer's job to make those less appealing and easy?
No, it's a good point. I mean, I view myself as someone who's a capitalist. I think if the developers are trying to make as much money as possible, that's fine. I don't necessarily blame them. I definitely put more blame on the parents, but it's very difficult, especially if you have a couple children. They all have their own consoles. Now you can play Fortnite on your phone. It's impossible to monitor what they're doing. So maybe there needs to be some sort of process in place so that you can't just basically click a button, spend $20 and acquire a skin in 30 seconds. I think both sides need to give a little bit. I think parents need to pay more attention to what their children are doing, and I think the developers maybe should put some precautions in place so that these things aren't as accessible. and so that they don't continue to happen. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
We're going to save that for episode 2. And I will put my opinion. Loot boxes are not gambling. The system's
Really?
fine the way it is. I
Oh
don't
my
have time to
goodness.
play. I don't have time to play video games anymore. So if I want to pay $30, $40 to fast track myself to get to where I want to go, to the parts I want to play, or look the way I want to look without spending the hours grinding, I have a right to. I make enough money to do that. So that's episode 2. That'll come out. We'll try to get this weekly, maybe next week. We'll pull in maybe some more gaming people. That'll be a fun discussion. Loot boxes, gambling. Stay tuned.
I real quick before we segue, I'm not disagreeing with that notion, but what you mentioned right there doesn't necessarily equate to a loot box. If you want to pay to advance in a game and you know that that's what's going to occur, then that's one thing. It's another thing when it's just, you're taking a chance to potentially progress. That's all. I'm cool with saying, hey, I want to spend an extra $50 to get a little bit further in the game or to make myself better. I've done it before in the past. Big Diablo 2 player, bought items online and I've sold items online. I've scammed people. So I was like Callie, but to a little bit of a lesser degree. I wish that I was able to just kind of control the entire economy of a game. That would be cool. But I would do it for real world financial reasons. And just before we segue, just so that because we're talking about this topic and I had already previously mentioned it, I would like to just bring up my story about how I was scammed as well. Real quick story, probably has happened to a bunch of other people, and it was again like $100 and I was furious. But NHL, or all the EA games, they have a game mode called Ultimate Team. You play sports games, you're familiar with that. And basically you open packs of cards, you get certain players, you earn coins to buy packs in the game by winning games or doing certain challenges, or just by paying real world money. I was a big Ultimate Team player in one of the NHL games a couple years ago. One of the first packs that I opened, so I didn't even pay real world money to purchase the pack, so it was just by luck. I happened to get Vladimir Tarasenko, who is an NHL superstar, one of the best players in the game and one of the most rare cards. I went and then sold that card in the auction house for X amount of coins. I don't really necessarily remember, but there are a bunch of websites out there that will tell you, if you have this amount of coins, that equates to this amount of money. So I then took those coins and decided, hey, I'm going to put them on eBay and sell it. I know it's technically against eBay's terms of service, but people still do it. So I had someone purchase, and it was funny because I put the posting up on eBay, and literally like within an hour, someone had purchased all of my coins for, it was somewhere around $100. All he did was he messaged me his gamer tag, and then I sent him the coins over the game. I thought it was a pretty smooth transaction. The guy was happy. Everything was all well and good until about 2 days later, when I noticed that the money that I was supposed to receive never ended up in my bank account. And he had put in a dispute with eBay claiming that he had never received the goods. An eBay representative contacted me and asked me for proof that I had sent the goods, and that would be the only way that I'd be able to receive my money. Of course, I didn't ship anything out to the guy, so I really had no proof. I did take a video of me sending the currency to him on the game, just as a precaution. I did send that to eBay, and they basically told me that, like, hey, this is against our terms of service. We can't back you up based on this evidence. And in the long run, I was beat for the $100. I never received the money, and I lost all of the coins. So yeah, and that was the end of my Ultimate Team playing experience.
So maybe Ultimate Team is the greater internet heist. And with that, we'll lead into Josh's topic here when we get right back.
Sweet. All right, everyone. As promised, break out the tinfoil hats. COVID-5G. So we're going to talk a little bit about the coronavirus. We're going to talk a little bit about a conspiracy that relates to 5G networks. The first thing that I want to talk about here, though, right off the bat, is I need to make sure that everyone that's listening to this podcast is aware of what a virus is. So basically, and this is a real simple definition, and by no means am I don't have a PhD in biology or infectious diseases, but a virus is a microscopic agent that has the ability to replicate inside of living cells. So viruses derive from living organisms. The best way to think about it is a living organism is exposed to something external, and and what happens is that the body releases toxins, and those toxins are released in a form of like a protein, or DNA, and then that DNA is released some way. So, for example, coughing or sneezing. If that infectious agent is then, for example, inhaled, could have an impact on another living organism. So that's a real simple definition of what a virus is and how it works. Based on that information, one of the first things that scientists try to figure out when there is a pandemic such as now is, where did a particular virus originate from? And right now with the coronavirus, I think initially off the bat, scientists thought that it may have derived from a bat. And I believe now, at least based on the research that I've done, that is no longer the case. Most scientists think that the coronavirus, or COVID-19, I'll be a little bit more specific because the coronavirus has been around for a while, but this particular strain, COVID-19, apparently derived from a fish market in Wuhan, China, either from some sort of fish or shrimp that wasn't handled properly, and then therefore it infected human beings and it spread from there. What if I told you that that wasn't necessarily the case? And it's not a far stretch of the imagination to think that that wasn't the case, because still to this day, they don't have a patient zero. They don't know who the first individual was that was infected with COVID-19. And I don't think they'll be able to figure that out. But what if I told you that the coronavirus could have potentially started from 5G, which basically is just an electromagnetic frequency? Now that probably sounds crazy right off the bat, that how could a technology such as that cause a global pandemic? And I'm going to try to provide you guys with some evidence as to why that could be the case. And again, I know this sounds crazy, but just stick with me here, and I think I can put together a pretty compelling argument. Whether or not you agree and are able to, draw the connection that yes, COVID-19 came from 5G electromagnetic frequencies is one thing, but it's not outlandish to necessarily believe that something such as 5G could cause a virus or a reaction from a living organism. So one of the first things that I'd like to point out here about 5G, or just RFR technology in general, is that it definitely has an impact on living organisms. Most scientists would agree on this. Where you have a disagreement is the level of impact. Meaning that we know that these types of frequencies have some sort of radiation associated with them. And human beings can withstand, to a degree, a certain level of radiation, it will not have an impact on you. So for example, you can go get an x-ray, and you're not going to walk out of that x-ray booth with a tumor, and you probably won't, end up with cancer. But it still does have an impact on your cells. Maybe very, very, very minimal, but it still has an impact on your cells. And they're able to determine this based on a bunch of studies that they do, where they take rats and they expose them to radiation and x-rays and microwaves and all these different frequencies or electromagnetic frequencies to determine the impact that those wavelengths have on a living organism. And most of the telecom companies right now would tell you that 5G is 100% safe, that it's not radioactive enough to have an impact on one's health. And one of the reasons why is because of the testing that's been done back in the 80s and 90s and the standards that are in place, and from the 80s and 90s that are basically saying that, hey, frequencies within this spectrum don't really have a negative impact on our health. 3G, 4G, 5G, infrared would be some examples. But with that being said, there really hasn't been enough research done to see how much of an impact that 5G would have on our health as human beings. And towards the end of 2019, 5G towers were starting to be built all over the globe. And one of the first places that 5G towers went up actually was in China, and more specifically in the Wuhan region of China, which right off the bat, that's kind of a weird coincidence that Wuhan and the people of Wuhan were the first individuals that were exposed to 5G technology. That also happens to be where the COVID-19 coronavirus originated. But if you follow that trend throughout history, you can start to see some other weird coincidences. So what year did 3G come out? If you do some research, pull it up on Google, you'll find out that 3G technology came out in 2003. And if you do a little bit more digging, you'll find out that in 2003, that also happened to be the same year that the SARS pandemic took place. And if you look a little bit further, so 2009, when 4G technology came out, and you take a look at what happened in 2009, H1N1, I think it was referred to as the bird flu, also took place in 2009. So if you just look at 2003, 3G was released, SARS happened. 2009, 4G was released, H1N1 happened. Now we're in 2019, 2020, and we have this COVID-19. And that could all just seem like a coincidence. But if you go all the way back to 1968, when satellite technology was first coming about, there was the Hong Kong flu. So as you can see, as technology has advanced and us as human beings have been exposed to these different electromagnetic frequencies, you could argue that there's potentially been an impact on our health with the different pandemics and viruses that have just coincidentally happened to have occurred right after human beings' exposure to that technology. So based on all of that information, Michael, just because I've held the discussion here now for the past 5 or 10 minutes, what are your initial thoughts?
You crazy? No. To kind of feed the fuel or the fire with some fuel here, the radio, you're talking about overexposure to high frequency
Correct.
radio waves.
Absolutely, EMF.
Which is part of the electromagnetic spectrum, which if you've watched anything on the Discovery or Travel Channel in the last 5 years, you've watched a ghost hunting show, you know that EMF can cause weird things with the body and the psyche and the mind. And It caused people to feel weird in certain levels. That same electromagnetic radiation is what we're talking about here with 5G or 3G and satellites. So inferring that you're saying that some people maybe are predisposed to some of this exposure in other ways that make them more susceptible to that the same type of technology, EMF or radio frequencies, is being used in the medical field. Just again, adding some fuel to your fire, that they've found that a certain radio frequency, when vibrating cancer cells, will cause them to kill themselves, basically disintegrate.
Yes, correct.
Which not then that far if we can kill a virus like cancer or disease. Could that same destructuring of a cell, could you also create a virus the same way? Is that how you're drawing some connections here?
Correct. So basically that EMF exposure is toxic to a living organism's body, and then therefore the body needs to release those toxins. It does that in the form of a virus, which then spreads. And if you take a look at, and we can really get far down the rabbit hole in this, but if you take a look at the areas where people are being impacted most by this COVID-19 virus, they also happen to be in the areas that have the most 5G coverage. So China, specifically Wuhan, Spain would be another, and Italy would be another as well. In Italy, I know they put up a ton of 5G towers, and it's not that simple because these also happen to be areas that are heavily populated. So it makes it easier for the virus to spread.
But those would also be the better candidates for 5G to begin with.
Correct, because they're populated cities. Same with New York City. And if you took a look at just the United States and you look at a graph of which states are being impacted the most by COVID-19, you have New York City's number 1. I think New Jersey's number 2. California's number 3. But those areas happen to also be the areas with the most 5G technology, which again could just be a result of those happen to be the most populated areas, but it is just a very weird coincidence. You look at like a state like Alabama that has had no or very little or very few cases of COVID-19. They also don't have any 5G towers in place yet, which is interesting. I think the bigger when I discuss this topic, the larger question that comes into play here is, well, why? Is it just out of ignorance? Let's just assume that the conclusion that I'm drawing is accurate and correct, which again it's a leap of faith. But if we knew for certain that 5G could cause a virus or a pandemic, then why would our government and why would these big corporations allow it to occur? And there's only 2 explanations for that, right? Either the first one is, one, they're too ignorant to know, which could be possible. If you look at like some of the big telecom companies, they might not know that would be the result of what they're doing. But the second thing is, and this kind of ties back into the first thing that you talked about today, when you talked about that trash can that takes a picture and posts your trash on Facebook, is that 5G, and the reason why these 5G towers are being built right now is because we are now coming out with technology that's going to be dependent on 5G, right? So you have the IoT, where quite simply, if you're not familiar with that, is all of your devices, your car, your fridge, your toaster, your coffee maker, are all going to be tied to a grid. That grid has a connection to the internet. And the reason for that is, one, it creates a bunch of cool features that you can now take advantage of. So you can open up your smartphone and turn on your coffee maker while you're, driving home from wherever it is you are. But two, they're able to pull data from those things as well. So they're able to know how many times you're brewing coffee, how many times you open your fridge throughout the day, and things like that. And then based on that information, they can then compile that data and determine, all right, well, if you're brewing coffee at this rate, then you'd need to purchase coffee at this rate. And there's a whole, if you just follow the money, you could see why big corporations are pushing for 5G.
And you have the other end of the spectrum. You have Elon Musk on his pile of money with Starlink pushing in the opposite direction.
In the opposite direction? How so?
Well, as opposed to putting 5G on the ground, he wants to put 5G in space.
Right. Gotcha. I thought you meant from a different perspective, not when you explained it that way. I thought you meant like, oh, well, Elon Musk isn't doing it for financial reasons when he certainly is.
Oh no, absolutely. He is our corporate overlord. All hail Elon Musk. He will save us from ourselves.
Well, it's funny you bring up Elon Musk, and again, not to veer too much off topic, but if you look at EV, right, like electric vehicles, Tesla dominates the market. You could go to in fact, this is a true story. I just bought a new vehicle about a month ago. I bought it from a BMW dealership. And while I was in the BMW dealership, in the showroom, they had one of their electric BMWs. I forget the model. It was a really nice vehicle. And I asked the salesman, like, how many of these do you actually sell? And he told me that he had been with BMW at that particular dealership for 2 years. And no one has ever purchased an electric BMW from that dealership within the past 2 years. So I asked him why. I was just out of curiosity, like, it's a nice car, why would no one buy it? There's tons of people out there that think that electric vehicles are better for the environment, and you would just assume that someone would purchase something like that. And he explained that the technology in those vehicles is not really good. It doesn't compare to Tesla. So for example, I think the battery life on this particular model that we were talking about was something like 160 to 200 miles. So after 160 miles, you have to recharge that battery. And down here in Florida, there aren't a lot of places that you can just stop on the road and charge your electric vehicle. Or if you look at Tesla, and again, I am not well versed in this, but I know that their battery life is much better. Their performance, what they're able to get out of those vehicles, is much better than what you would get from an electric BMW or an electric Nissan. But what Tesla is doing is they patented all their technology, and none of it is, like, at least from what my understanding is, it's not open source. So BMW can't pull resources from what they got going on, or what Elon Musk has going on. So he's kind of controlling that market at this time. I think eventually the other auto companies like BMW, Nissan, and the other companies out there that are making electric vehicles, Toyota, they'll eventually get there, but at this time they don't have the ability to compete with Tesla. What I find funny is if the argument is that, hey, we need to have electric vehicles because of our environment, there's a less of an impact on our environment. And if that is something that Elon Musk truly believed, then why wouldn't he make his technology available for everyone to use, pull from, and potentially progress? I think he's cornering the market for financial reasons. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, he's got to make money somehow, otherwise he's never going to send someone to Mars.
Right.
You all buy flamethrowers from him. That'll help put people on Mars. You buy his cars. We're putting people on Mars. He, in my opinion, he's not so much. Yes, he's copyrighted. There's a lot of proprietary technology in use from Tesla, but it's not necessarily because of that, they've had other auto manufacturers try to reverse engineer the technology, and the technology is just that much more advanced. He's got the buying power to buy the right engineers, the right scientists. He's not like your Ford or your Toyota. Your parts are coming from how many different manufacturers? Yes, most of your Toyota parts are made by Toyota, but the electronics, the components are not made. Toyota doesn't make the circuit boards. Toyota's not making the wires. Literally, Tesla has made every component within its vehicle, and they've been able to iterate on that without having, Toyota can't say I need better computer in the car without going to the manufacturer of the computer, them programming. It's not in-house. There's delays, costs. Tesla's all in-house, and they're able to do it much quicker because of that.
So to circle back, because I know we veered off topic there, if the conspiracy is that 5G could potentially cause a virus outbreak such as COVID-19, then the second part of that conspiracy is why is that happening? And then this is where you really break out your tinfoil hat and
I can connect Tesla directly to coronavirus for you. I've got the connection.
Right.
His purchase 2 years ago of non-FDA approved BiPAP ventilators, like the traditional CPAP for sleep apnea. He purchased 2 years ago a company, and all of their inventory of BiPAP, they're non-FDA approved for ventilators, which is what everyone needs now for the coronavirus. Now, because of the coronavirus, the FDA has said that these BiPAP machines in today's circumstances are FDA approved because there's a national shortage on actual ventilators. Tesla is giving a good portion of them away, but is also making a good bit of money on them.
Exactly. So I think if you make the connection, this is all a result of control. Whose control? You could say big corporations, you could say the government, you could say that the government are in cahoots with the big corporations, and that wouldn't be a far stretch, as the people governing our country at least are being influenced by lobbyists, and the lobbyists with the most money are the ones that have the most influence, and those lobbyists tend to come from big corporations. So one would assume that they're pushing for 5G so that we can utilize IoT and everything can be connected to the grid, or even the matrix, if you want to call it that, so they can take all of this data and profit off of it. And if that comes with the death of X amount of human beings, it was worth it, because in the end goal is there. And you can even get crazier. All right, now that we have the virus, how do we cure the virus? Well, we need to come up with some sort of vaccine that we now will expose to everyone and make a bunch of money off of that as well. So you can really kind of get crazy and go down the rabbit hole. But
it follows quite good with I Am Legend. Go watch that right now.
I haven't seen it in a while.
New York, the whole way the vaccine, it's a cure for cancer, and it's a vaccine created out of necessity through measles and rushed to the public, and this company's stocks skyrocket, and then all of a sudden, zombies. So.
Yeah, but if you do happen to listen to this podcast and you're bored, if you just go on Google, type in Wuhan civilians knock down 5G towers or something along those lines. In fact, Snopes even has an article on it. Someone on Twitter released it and it went viral, where they're showing all of these Chinese citizens in Wuhan, like, trying to pull down the 5G towers. And the reason why they were trying to pull down the 5G towers is because they thought that had a reason, or that was the reason behind why they were getting sick. This was very early on, before they even had a name for this coronavirus and COVID-19 and everything. But to them, that was the only thing noticeable or noticeably different, and they thought that the reason why all these people were getting sick and dropping dead was because of the 5G towers. The funny thing is, Snopes, which honestly I'm not a huge fan of that website because I do think they're biased, they often provide like a conclusion as to yes, this is true, no, it's false, and they give research or evidence as to how they back up those claims. The Snopes article about this particular event doesn't really say it's true or false. They basically, I think they say that it's a miscaption, which their definition of something being miscaptioned is, yes, it's true that that event took place. Yes, it's true that's why they were doing it, but it's miscaptioned because there's no scientific evidence or research to say that the 5G towers are the reason why the people were dying and getting ill. So based on that information, I find it very, very, very weird that that even the Chinese people that were initially first exposed to all of this, that was their initial conclusion that they drew as well, that hey, it's got to be because they put up all these darn 5G towers. Ever since that those have been up, people are getting sick, and they started to knock them down. Who knows? I mean, I don't know if we'll ever know if that's the reason why, but I just think there's a lot of weird coincidences.
Well, as we keep going through the podcast through these next couple weeks, we're going to do a couple more episodes. I'd love to have a check-in with the Coronavirus Corner with Josh here. He can keep us updated on this story. And thank you again for providing us a very, very good, quick dive down a rabbit hole that I knew you'd bring to this podcast.
That's my job, man.
I hope everyone enjoyed the two different perspectives of what we think is weird about the internet today. Again, I kind of took a small little chance to give you a personal story about something that happened to me with the online game and what is called the Great Internet Heist of in-game currency within EVE Online. And Josh took us down a wonderful rabbit hole of COVID-5G, the coronavirus. Was it caused by the 5G cellular towers? We'll keep you updated. I'm still on the fence, and the jury's still out. Josh, do you have any anything to add on your story to help sway me onto your side here? Because I'm with you. I do understand the dangers of 5G. I don't quite.
Yeah, it requires a leap of faith. I mean, and I don't know if I'm even 100% convinced myself either. But just one last thing that I just find interesting is when my wife, by the way, she works for a school district. So when this whole COVID-19 outbreak took place, they started shutting down all of the schools. Everyone began working from home. She had a friend, someone that she works with, realized that there were a bunch of people out near one of the schools. They were building something. So she went and contacted the school to kind of figure out, what's going on, because they're making all of the employees stay at home, work from home. They're not able to go out and work in the school district, and the students can't show up and so forth. But yet there's a bunch of people at the school or near the location of the school working during the outbreak. It was just out of mere curiosity. When she spoke to the person, they said, no, they have the right to be out there. They're essential workers, something along those lines. She then kind of implored them, well, what are they doing? And she just, the woman said back to her, oh, they're building a cell tower. She then said, oh, is it a 5G cell tower? And the lady was like, I can't really go into details. And that was the end of the discussion. The only reason why I bring that up is because despite the outbreak, despite the pandemic, when there's been orders to self-quarantine and everyone should stay inside, they are still currently building 5G towers in the United States. There's 154,000 5G towers as of today, and that number is going to continue to grow despite there being orders from governors, our government, the president to self-quarantine. The telecom companies are still out there making money building 5G towers. I find that to be very interesting.
There's a big disconnect between what's considered essential and what's not right now, and that's interesting to find that they're still somewhat exempt. And I think that will lead me to concede on this first episode. Although my story was weird, it was weird in a different way. It was weird because the guy is just playing a video game for fun and trolling thousands of players in a game by holding their currency. And so far is avoiding any legal repercussion from it.
Yep. And the weirdest thing about that story is that he took all of that currency and he basically just hoarded it, sat on it, didn't do anything. Now, my first initial reaction when you were telling that story was, hey, if I was that guy, I'd take that currency, I trade it in for some real world money, I'd go out, buy myself a Ferrari, a new house or something like that. And I was like, that would be really crazy. Like, what if this guy took all that money and just blew it? But now that I think about it, what's even crazier is that he just held on to the currency and didn't do anything with it. It's weird. Like, what are his plans? Can we get this guy on the podcast?
The better title may have been Eve's Greatest Troll.
That's what he is, man.
And with that, we're going to end the first episode of Generation Web. I do want to make sure you guys check us out on Twitter at GenWebPod. You can go to anchor.fm/generationweb. And again, a quick reminder, this episode is sponsored by Anchor. You can download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started creating your own podcast today. We'll see you guys next week.
See you.